Do you remember when the highways of America glowed with signs that promised not just food, but a memory? Neon lights flickered against the night sky. Orange roofs and red barns marked the roadside, and the scent of burgers and fries drifted through the warm summer air. Those places are gone now, most of them erased, their doors locked and their recipes forgotten. And yet, in quiet corners of memory, they still live on. This evening, we'll journey back to a time when fast food was young, experimental, and full of character. Before the giants of today took over, there were other names: Burger Chef, Red Barn, Howard Johnson's, and so many more that shaped the taste of a generation. Some served hot dogs steamed in beer. Others handed you root beer in frosty glass mugs at your car window. Some offered pancake breakfasts at booths the color of bright orange vinyl, while others built barn-shaped restaurants right in the middle of bustling cities. They were more than just places to eat. They were pieces of Americana, scattered along highways and town streets, woven into childhoods and family road trips. But as the years passed, they faded. Some collapsed under poor management, others were swallowed by bigger brands, and still others simply couldn't keep up with the changing pace of life. Tonight, we'll revisit them, not as business stories, but as quiet memories. Welcome, dear listener, to Sleepy Town Radio. Here, we tell quiet stories for quiet hearts, stories meant to be remembered slowly, like the glow of a neon sign lingering in the dark. So settle in, let your mind drift, and together, we'll step back into the soft glow of forgotten roadside diners and the flavors of America that time left behind. There was a time, not so long ago, when the name Burger Chef lit up highways and small-town streets across America. Its bright red and white signs stood tall, a beacon for families on the move, teenagers looking for a place to gather, and children eager for the simple joy of a hamburger and fries. At its peak, Burger Chef wasn't just another fast food chain. With more than 1,200 locations scattered across the country, it stood shoulder to shoulder with McDonald's, a true rival in what some historians now call the very first burger wars. What set Burger Chef apart was not only the food, but the way it made eating fast food feel fun and new. They were pioneers, always trying something a little different. It was Burger Chef, not McDonald's, who first dreamed up the idea of a children's meal complete with a toy, something they called the fun meal. Decades later, the world would know it as the Happy Meal. But for those who remember, it was Burger Chef that brought the magic to life first. And then there was the Works Bar, a counter lined with toppings where customers could build their burgers exactly how they liked them. Lettuce, onions, pickles, tomatoes, piled high or stacked neat, it was your choice. In an age when fast food usually meant one size fits all, Burger Chef invited people to make something personal. It was an early glimpse of what we now take for granted at places like Five Guys or Subway. But back then it felt revolutionary. Their menu had its own signature treasures too. The Big Chef, a double-decker sandwich with its own special sauce, was their proud answer to McDonald's Big Mac. For a brief, shining moment, the two giants went head to head, each trying to outdo the other in size, flavor, and innovation. It was playful competition, and it made the dining landscape of the 1960s and 70s feel alive with possibility. But while Burger Chef's ideas were bright, its future dimmed under heavy clouds of mismanagement. In the mid-1970s, the chain was sold to General Foods, a company with deep experience in packaged groceries, but very little in the unpredictable world of restaurants. The magic began to slip. Decisions were made not with the warmth of families in mind, but with cold corporate efficiency. Slowly, locations began to close. By 1982, many had been sold to Hardee's, their signage replaced, their menu items erased. By the mid-1990s, the Burger Chef name was gone from American roadsides. Yet, as with so many things in Americana, the spirit lingers. A few former locations, quiet places tucked into small towns like Cleveland, Tennessee, still serve burgers and fries under different names, but the recipes are whispers of the past. Old commercials sometimes resurface on the internet, their jingles tinny but strangely comforting, like hearing a familiar voice from childhood. For those who remember, Burger Chef was more than just hamburgers. It was the feeling of sliding into a booth on a Friday night, unwrapping a sandwich with friends, or watching your children's eyes light up at the sight of a toy tucked into their fun meal. It was the thrill of possibility on the open road, the glow of a neon sign promising something simple and good. And though the buildings have faded and the signs have come down, the memory of Burger Chef lives on, in the taste of a burger that once rivaled the Big Mac, in the laughter of families long past, and in the quiet nostalgia of a time when fast food still felt fresh, surprising, and full of wonder. There was once a time when families setting out on long car trips across America felt a sense of comfort the moment they saw a bright orange roof rising above the roadside. It was the unmistakable mark of Howard Johnson's, known affectionately as Hojo's. For decades, those orange rooftops and turquoise cupolas became symbols of reliability, warmth, and a taste of home away from home. Howard Johnson's began humbly in Quincy, Massachusetts, as a single ice cream stand. But by the middle of the 20th century, it had grown into the largest restaurant chain in America, with more than 1,000 locations stretching across highways and towns. For many families, stopping at Hojo's was as much a part of the journey as the destination itself. What drew people in wasn't just speed or convenience. It was variety and a touch of quality that felt different from the fast food counters popping up in the same era. They were famous, of course, for their 28 flavors of ice cream. Long before names like Baskin-Robbins or Ben & Jerry's became household words, children could stand in front of a Howard Johnson's counter, their eyes wide at the rainbow of choices: chocolate chip, butter pecan, black raspberry, pistachio, even peppermint stick. A scoop or two became the sweetest part of a family vacation. But it wasn't only about ice cream. Their fried clams became legendary, as did their hot dogs, cheerfully called Frankfurters. There were chicken platters, seafood dinners, and breakfasts served in booths with vinyl seats, where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the salty scent of fried food. Howard Johnson's was not just a restaurant. It was a ritual of travel. The architecture itself was unforgettable. Driving along highways in the 1950s or 60s, the orange roofs shone like a beacon. Parents would smile in relief, knowing they had found a familiar place to rest. Children pressed their faces to the car window, already dreaming of which flavor of ice cream they might choose this time. The signs and buildings became as iconic to the American landscape as white picket fences or small-town gas stations. But times change, and with them, so did America's appetite. As the interstate highway system expanded in the 1960s and 70s, travelers sought speed above all else. Drive-thrus grew more appealing than sit-down restaurants. Chains like McDonald's and Burger King, built on fast service, began to eclipse the slower pace of Howard Johnson's. Families no longer lingered at orange booths. They wanted to grab their food and get back on the road. One by one, the restaurants closed. By the turn of the new century, only a handful remained, and their once proud reputation had faded. The final Howard Johnson's, standing in Lake George, New York, closed its doors in 2017. With that closing came the end of an era, and a silence that settled over the orange rooftops that had once dotted the country. And yet, the memory lingers. For baby boomers who grew up sliding into those booths, licking ice cream cones in the back seat, or sharing fried clams on a family vacation, Howard Johnson's is more than just a restaurant name. It is a warm fragment of Americana, something no modern fast food experience can replicate. Even now, when people see a photograph of that orange roof, they smile softly. It carries them back to a simpler moment when a road trip meant the excitement of new places and a stop at Hojo's meant comfort, laughter, and a taste of home on the open road. There was a time when even in the busiest of cities, you could look up and see a little reminder of the countryside. It stood tall and unmistakable, bright red walls, a sloped roof, and a small white cupola perched on top like a weather vane of simpler days. This was the Red Barn, a chain that brought a touch of rural charm to the fast food boom of the 1960s and 70s. To many children, it looked like a toy barn come to life, planted right in the middle of town. Parents would pull into the lot, their headlights catching the cheerful red paint, and step inside to a place that smelled of sizzling burgers and warm fries. The architecture alone made it memorable, but the food sealed its place in memory. Red Barn's menu was playful, even clever. Their signature burger, called the Big Barney, was a 2-patty sandwich with special sauce and toppings that some say rivaled the Big Mac. For those with an even bigger appetite, there was the Barnbuster, a towering creation that seemed almost too big to hold. And tucked in the corner, something unusual for fast food at the time, a self-serve salad bar, one of the very first of its kind. Children marveled at being able to scoop their own lettuce and tomatoes, while parents appreciated a chance to put something green on the plate alongside the fries. The commercials and jingles are remembered still, especially the catchy line, "When the hungries hit the Red Barn." Those words would echo in the heads of children long after they left, becoming part of the background soundtrack of their youth. For a while, Red Barn thrived. With more than 400 locations spread across the United States and even into Canada, it gave the impression of permanence. Teenagers gathered there after football games. Families went in on weeknights, and the sight of the red building became as familiar as the gas stations and corner drugstores of mid-century America. But behind the cheerful exterior, the foundation was less secure. Red Barn's parent company, Servomation, was more interested in its real estate holdings than in nurturing a restaurant chain. Promotion dwindled, and without strong support, the barns began to close, one after another. When Servomation was eventually sold to the owners of Motel 6, the final push of support disappeared. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Red Barns began vanishing from city streets, their bright facades fading into memory. Today, no official Red Barn restaurants remain. A few of the buildings, though, still stand, converted into small diners or local shops, their barn-shaped silhouettes a faint reminder of what they once were. For those who knew them, the sight is enough to stir something deep inside. The memory of sliding into a booth, the taste of a big Barney wrapped in paper, the laughter of friends, and the hum of a jingle that belonged to a gentler time. Red Barn may have been just another competitor in the fast food wars, but for many, it was more than that. It was a bright splash of red in the cityscape, a piece of rural imagination in an urban world, and a place where childhood appetites met simple joys. And even now, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. When the hungries hit the Red Barn. There was a time when the smell of warm pancakes drifted through the morning air at more than 1,000 restaurants across America. Families would pull off the road, step into a booth with vinyl seats, and be greeted by the cheerful sign of Sambo's. For many, it was a place of comfort, where breakfast didn't just start the day, it shaped a memory. Sambo's began in 1957 in Santa Barbara, California. Its recipe for success was simple: affordable pancakes, hot coffee, and a friendly atmosphere that welcomed families of every kind. The booths were cozy, the service was quick, and the menu promised hearty breakfasts served all day. In an age before IHOP or Denny's dominated the landscape, Sambo's was the place to go for stacks of fluffy pancakes dripping with syrup. For children, the walls themselves seemed alive with stories. Murals and decorations often featured colorful scenes from the controversial children's book that had inspired the chain's name. While the founders insisted the association was accidental, a blend of the two original owners' names. The restaurant leaned into the imagery, painting scenes of a little boy and a tiger across its dining rooms. For many kids, these murals were whimsical and fun, remembered almost like a cartoon that accompanied their meal. At its peak, Sambo's stretched to more than 1,100 locations, more than Burger King had at the time. The name was cheerful to some, but as the 1970s brought forward the civil rights movement and new awareness of racial sensitivity, the very same name began to cast a shadow. Protests grew louder. Legal challenges mounted. What once seemed playful began to feel painful for many communities. The controversy collided with poor financial decisions. Rapid expansion brought massive debt, and when interest rates soared in the late 1970s, the company could not keep up. By 1981, bankruptcy loomed, and the once mighty pancake empire began to crumble. Restaurants closed. Some were renamed Jolly Tiger, No Place Like Sam's. But the damage had been done. Still, even in decline, Sambo's held a place in memory. For those who had grown up eating there, it wasn't just about pancakes. It was about the feel of a warm booth on a Saturday morning, the sound of silverware clinking on plates, the comfort of maple syrup poured slowly over steaming stacks. It was about being a child again, watching sunlight filter through the windows while a mother or father sipped coffee across the table. For decades, one final location survived in Santa Barbara, the very spot where it all began. It stood as both a relic and a reminder. serving those same pancakes to locals and travelers alike. But in 2020, as the world once again confronted issues of race and history, the name finally changed. The restaurant remained, but the Sambo sign came down, ending the last visible trace of a once sprawling chain. Yet, the memory lingers. For many, Sambo's is a symbol of two things at once: the warmth of family breakfasts and the reminder of how culture shifts with time. Its story is complicated, woven with nostalgia and controversy, sweetness and sorrow. But for those who remember sliding into an orange booth and tasting pancakes on a Sunday morning, it will always be part of the fabric of Americana. One more roadside name now lost to time. There was something unusual and unforgettable about the way a Lum's hot dog tasted. It wasn't grilled and it wasn't boiled. Instead, it was steamed gently in beer, a curious method that gave the humble hot dog a flavor unlike anything else on the roadside. For decades, that one quirk was enough to turn Lum's into a beloved name in the fast food world. And for many families, it became a place where an ordinary meal felt just a little more adventurous. Lum's began simply as a small hot dog stand in Miami, Florida, run by brothers Stewart and Clifford Perlman. From the very beginning, their little stand had something special. The idea of steaming a hot dog in beer, playful, almost mischievous, made people smile. Soon, what had started as one stand became a full-service restaurant chain with a cozy pub-like atmosphere. Dark wood panels lined the walls, stained glass lamps cast a warm glow, and the smell of seasoned burgers and beer-soaked hot dogs lingered in the air. By the late 1960s, Lum's had grown into more than 400 locations nationwide. Families packed into booths. Teenagers ordered Frosty mugs of root beer to go with their hot dogs, and regulars came back time after time for the Ollie Burger, a house specialty created by a chef with a secret seasoning blend. It wasn't just about the food, it was the mood. Each restaurant felt less like fast food and more like a neighborhood tavern where you could sit a while, laugh with friends, and forget about the clock. But behind the cheerful glow, the business side of Lum's became complicated. In 1971, the Perlman brothers sold the chain to the owners of Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas for $4 million. Casinos, however, are not restaurants. The new owners understood gambling and entertainment, but struggled to keep the restaurant business steady. Over the years that followed, Lum's changed hands several times. Each new chapter brought less stability. The charm inside the dining rooms remained, but the leadership outside began to falter. By the early 1980s, the cracks had become too deep. Financial problems mounted, locations began to close, and by 1982, the company had filed for bankruptcy. Some say the very last location hung on until 2009 in Bellevue, Nebraska, serving beer-steamed hot dogs until the final day. Others remember the last one closing in 2017. Either way, what had once been hundreds of glowing signs had dwindled to a single fading light, and then, at last, to memory. And yet, that memory is strong. Ask those who grew up near a Lum's, and they'll tell you about the cozy interiors, the thick burgers, the laughter shared over simple meals, and always, the hot dogs. Even today, whispers of the recipe survive. Some say former employees still make beer-steamed hot dogs at home, passing the tradition quietly from one kitchen to another. Lum's may be gone from the roadside, its signs taken down, its stained glass lamps dimmed. But the memory of those hot dogs, strange and wonderful, remains a small piece of Americana. It is a reminder of a time when fast food was not only quick, it was inventive, a little daring, and always made to be remembered. There was a time when the word hamburger didn't immediately bring to mind golden arches. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, another name lit up roadsides across America: Henry's Hamburgers. For a brief, shining moment, Henry's was everywhere, and it promised something almost too good to believe. A hot, juicy hamburger for just 10 cents. Henry's was born as an offshoot of Bresler's ice cream company. At first, it was simply a way to sell more ice cream by adding savory foods to the menu. But quickly, the hamburgers took center stage. The concept was simple and brilliant. Keep the menu small, the prices low, and the service fast. A dime could get you a hamburger, 15 cents for a cheeseburger, and a handful of change was enough to feed an entire family. At its peak in the early 1960s, Henry's boasted more than 200 locations across the country. For a moment, it even outnumbered McDonald's. The buildings themselves had a cheerful, welcoming look. Simple roadside stands with bright signage and wide parking lots. Many featured car hop service, where young employees in crisp uniforms would hurry across the lot, carrying trays of burgers, fries, and shakes. They clipped the trays to the open windows of waiting cars, and families could enjoy their meals without ever leaving their seats. For many children, Henry's was more than a restaurant. It was an event. The memory of a paper-wrapped burger, steam rising as the wrapper was peeled back, is etched into countless childhoods. The fries were salty and hot, the milkshakes rich and sweet, and the thrill of being served right at your car window made the meal feel almost magical. But the magic couldn't last forever. As the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, a quiet revolution was happening in the fast food industry. McDonald's pioneered the drive-through window, giving customers not just convenience, but speed and privacy. While Henry still relied on car hops jogging between cars in rain or snow, the drive-through made it possible to stay warm and dry while collecting your order. It was faster, more efficient, and soon became the standard. The oil crisis of the 1970s dealt an even harsher blow. With gas prices soaring and families cutting back on car trips, the car hop model lost much of its appeal. Henry's, once ahead of the curve, began to fade. Location after location closed, until almost all were gone. And yet, the story didn't end entirely. In Benton Harbor, Michigan, one final Henry's Hamburgers still stands. The building is modest, almost like a time capsule. Inside, the menu is familiar. The hamburgers prepared with the same simple recipe that once delighted millions. Locals still stop by, and nostalgic travelers sometimes make a detour just to experience a taste of the past. To step inside that last Henry's is to step back half a century. The smell of burgers sizzling on the grill, the taste of fries salted just right, and the knowledge that this was once a true rival to McDonald's. All of it lingers in that little corner of Michigan. Henry's Hamburgers may have been overtaken by the giants of fast food, but it remains a reminder of a different era. An era when 10 cents could buy you not just a meal, but a memory. And sometimes, a memory is the most valuable thing of all. In the late 1950s, Baltimore had more than just football fever. It had a burger chain that carried the name of one of its hometown heroes. Gino's Hamburgers, founded in 1957 by Gino Marchetti, the legendary defensive end of the Baltimore Colts, wasn't just another stop for fast food. It was a place where the thrill of Sunday games spilled over into everyday life, and where a meal could feel like part of the celebration. The restaurants themselves carried a certain energy. Bright, bold signage announced the name, and inside, the walls were often decorated with football memorabilia, helmets, jerseys, photographs of the Colts frozen in mid-play. For kids, it felt like stepping into a shrine of the sport. For adults, it was a place where the pride of local heroes and the comfort of good food blended together. And then there was the food. The chain's signature sandwich, the Gino Giant, lived up to its name. 2 beef patties, tangy sauce, lettuce, cheese, and all the trimmings stacked high. So large, in fact, that holding it in your hands was a challenge. "Everybody goes for a Gino Giant," the slogan said, and for a time, they were right. The Gino Giant was more than a burger. It was a rival to the Big Mac, a local heavyweight that carried the swagger of the man whose name was on the sign. But what made Gino's especially unique was its partnership with Kentucky Fried Chicken. Long before combo restaurants became common, Gino's offered both burgers and Colonel Sanders' famous fried chicken under the same roof. A family could order crispy drumsticks alongside a Gino Giant, satisfying everyone at the table. It was a simple idea that worked brilliantly, and it helped the chain grow to more than 350 locations across the East Coast. For many who grew up in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, memories of Gino's are inseparable from the glow of Friday night lights and the excitement of weekend games. Families would stop in after church. Kids in Little League uniforms would fill the booths, and fans on their way home from Colts games would swing by for a late-night burger. In those moments, Gino's felt less like a chain and more like a piece of the community. But like so many stories from the golden age of fast food, the ending came quietly. In 1982, the Marriott Corporation purchased Gino's for $48 million. Almost overnight, many locations were converted into Roy Rogers restaurants. The football helmets came down from the walls, the menus changed, and the Gino Giant disappeared. For the players who had lent their names and the families who had filled the booths, it felt like a chapter closing, and yet, not all is gone. In Maryland, a handful of Gino's locations have been revived in recent years, keeping the name alive for those who long to taste that iconic burger once more. Though the chain's heyday has passed, its memory lives on, in the stories of Colts fans, in the taste of a sandwich once big enough to rival a legend, and in the pride of a city where football and fast food once walked hand in hand. Gino's Hamburgers may have vanished from most of the map, but for those who remember, it remains a symbol of a time when a meal was more than food. It was community, loyalty, and the joy of cheering for something bigger than yourself. If you drove through certain Midwestern cities in the 1930s or 40s, you might have seen them, little white buildings with towers that seemed plucked from a fairy tale. Their walls were bright and clean, their roofs topped with battlements like tiny castles planted on ordinary street corners. These were White Tower restaurants, a chain that rose in the shadow of another, more famous castle, and for a time carved out its own place in the American landscape. White Tower began in Milwaukee in 1926, just a few years after White Castle had captured the country's imagination with its tiny square hamburgers and gleaming sanitary look. The resemblance was no accident. The founders of White Tower borrowed heavily from White Castle's blueprint. The name, the architecture, even the idea that a restaurant could stand as a beacon of cleanliness in an uncertain world. Customers, however, didn't mind. They saw the white walls as fresh, the towers as inviting, and the hamburgers, steamed with onions and served for just a nickel, as a bargain that fit the times. By the 1940s, White Tower had grown to more than 230 locations across the Midwest and East Coast. For many city dwellers, especially in places like Detroit, Toledo, and Philadelphia, White Tower wasn't just a place to grab a quick meal. It was the smell of grilled onions drifting down a busy street. It was the sight of office workers in suits stopping for a quick lunch, and families sliding into booths on a Saturday afternoon. The restaurants often stayed open late, glowing softly under neon signs, welcoming night shift workers and travelers long after other places had closed. For children, the magic was in the size of the burgers. They were small enough for little hands, and parents could buy them by the sack, a paper bag filled with steaming sliders. The memory of lifting that bag, warm and fragrant, has stayed with many who grew up in those years. But the resemblance to White Castle eventually brought trouble. In the 1930s, White Castle filed a lawsuit claiming that White Tower had copied too closely. The courts agreed, and White Tower was forced to change its designs, slowly shifting away from the castle-like architecture that had once defined it. Without its signature look, the chain lost some of its charm. As the decades wore on, competition grew fierce. McDonald's, Burger King, and other rising giants offered more variety, larger advertising budgets, and the drive-through convenience that city-based White Towers struggled to match. One by one, locations began to disappear. By the 1980s, only a handful remained. In 2004, the last White Tower in Toledo, Ohio, closed its doors, leaving behind only photographs and fading memories. And yet, the echo of White Tower still lingers. Old postcards show their shining white buildings against the gray of city streets. Elderly residents in Detroit or Philadelphia sometimes speak of them fondly. The quick lunches, the late-night coffee, the burgers wrapped in thin paper that tasted of onions and nostalgia. White Tower may have lived in the shadow of White Castle, but for those who remember, it had a quiet magic all its own. A little white building on a corner, glowing against the night, offering warmth, food, and a memory that time has not fully erased. There was a time when summer evenings meant more than heat and long daylight. They meant the cool fizz of a root beer served in a heavy, frosty glass mug. And nowhere did that experience shine brighter than at Dog and Suds, the beloved drive-in chain that for many families became the very definition of American summertime. The story of Dog and Suds began in 1953 in Champaign, Illinois, when two music teachers dreamed of opening a drive-in. What they created would quickly spread across the Midwest and beyond, a place where cars pulled into wide lots, neon lights buzzed against the dusk, and car hops, sometimes on roller skates, glided from window to window, carrying trays of hot dogs, hamburgers, and the chain's signature root beer. The food was simple, but it carried a charm all its own. Hot dogs tucked into soft buns, burgers sizzling on the grill, and fries golden and crisp. but it was the root beer that kept people coming back. Brewed in-house, poured from taps into thick glass mugs chilled until they frosted at the edges. It wasn't just a drink. It was an experience. The first sip was cold, sweet, and foamy. The kind of taste that seemed to belong only to summer nights and open skies. At its height in the 1960s and 70s, Dog & Suds boasted nearly 600 locations across the United States. For many teenagers, it was the place to gather after a ball game or a movie. For families, it was a small reward at the end of a long week. Children in the back seat pressed their noses to the glass, watching as trays were clipped onto the car window, turning an ordinary meal into a little adventure. But as the years passed, the world began to change. The rise of the drive-thru meant people no longer had to park and wait. The car hop, once a symbol of fun and novelty, came to feel old-fashioned. Chains like McDonald's and Burger King streamlined service, offering speed that Dog & Suds simply could not match. Slowly, locations began to close. By the 1980s, the bright neon signs with the cheerful Dachshund mascot were disappearing from highways and towns. The chain that once defined summer evenings had shrunk to only a handful of surviving locations, scattered mostly across the Midwest. Many were converted into independent diners or left to fade into memory, and yet, Dog & Suds never fully vanished. A small number of restaurants still exist today, proudly serving root beer the way it was always meant to be served, cold, foamy, in frosted mugs. For those who stop by, the experience feels like a time machine. The car hops may be fewer, the lots a little quieter, but that first sip of root beer still carries with it the taste of long summer nights, laughter echoing across parking lots, and the glow of neon against the dark. Dog & Suds remains, in memory and in small corners of the Midwest, a reminder of how simple pleasures defined an era. A root beer, a hot dog, a family crowded into a car, the music of the radio humming softly in the background. These were the flavors of Americana. And for those who remember, the name Dog & Suds still tastes like summer itself. There was a brief moment in America's fast food story when plaid skirts and Scottish kilts appeared alongside hamburgers and fries. The chain was called Sundaes, and though its life was short, its memory still lingers, bright as the tartan patterns its employees once wore. Sundaes emerged during the fast food boom of the 1960s, a time when every new idea seemed possible and every roadside sign tried to outshine the next. What set Sundaes apart was its theme. Instead of plain uniforms, employees dressed in red and green plaid. The mascot, a cheerful cartoon boy in a kilt, smiled from signs and menus. For children pulling into the lot with their families, that mascot was as memorable as the food itself, a little piece of Scotland transplanted onto American soil. Inside, the restaurants carried the same motif. Walls were decorated with plaid accents, the counters bright, and the atmosphere cheerful. Hamburgers were the main attraction, simple, hearty, and inexpensive. Customers often remembered the burgers as juicy and flavorful, served quickly in paper wrappers alongside fries and milkshakes. The theme gave the meal an extra layer of novelty, something playful in an age when dining out was still a small treat for many families. For parents, Sundaes was convenient and affordable. For children, it was fun. There was a sense of whimsy in ordering a burger under the gaze of a kilt-wearing mascot, or watching teenagers in plaid uniforms balance trays of steaming food. Like so many chains of its era, Sundaes didn't just serve food. It created an atmosphere, a moment of delight tucked into the rhythm of everyday life. At its peak, Sundaes boasted more than 200 locations across the Midwest and South. They grew quickly, fueled by a booming car culture and the promise of fast food as family entertainment. But rapid growth can be dangerous, and Sundaes soon found itself competing against giants with deeper pockets and stronger brands. By the early 1970s, the cracks began to show. The playful theme was not enough to keep up with the efficiency and advertising power of McDonald's, Burger King, and Hardee's. Expansion slowed, profits dipped, and the cheerful plaid began to fade. Eventually, Sundaes was absorbed into the Hardee's brand. One by one, the Scottish-themed restaurants disappeared, their mascots taken down, their uniforms retired, and yet traces of Sundaes remain in memory. For those who grew up near one of its restaurants, the name still brings back images of bright plaid and the taste of a hot burger on a Saturday afternoon. Sometimes, old menus or photographs surface online, faded snapshots of children standing in front of the smiling kilted mascot, families sitting at tables decorated with tartan accents. They remind us that fast food was once an explosion of creativity, where even a Scottish-themed burger stand could find its place for a little while. Sundaes never became a giant, but it didn't need to. It gave families a few years of fun, of warmth, of laughter, wrapped in paper and plaid. And though it vanished into the larger story of Hardee's, its memory remains one of those quiet, forgotten details of Americana, a tartan thread in the patchwork quilt of roadside dining. There was a time when a smiling boy with a hamburger for a head watched over busy street corners, inviting families inside for a simple meal. His round face was friendly, his cartoonish eyes wide, and his little paper hat perched proudly on top. He was the mascot of Carrols, a regional fast food chain that, for a brief moment, captured the hearts and appetites of America. Carrols was founded in the early 1960s, part of the great wave of fast food experimentation that spread across small towns and mid-sized cities. The restaurants were cheerful and unpretentious, designed for families on the go. But what made them truly memorable was that mascot, the Burger Boy. For children, he was impossible to miss. His smiling face appeared on signs, menus, and even trays, a whimsical figure that promised burgers, fries, and fun. The menu itself was straightforward. Hamburgers and cheeseburgers wrapped in crisp paper, French fries served in little paper cups, milkshakes that left rings of condensation on Formica tables. There was a familiarity in every bite, but also a warmth. Carrols was not trying to compete with the giants, at least not at first. Instead, it carved out a place in local communities, offering affordable food in a friendly setting where families could gather, laugh, and enjoy a meal together. For many children in upstate New York and parts of the Midwest, a stop at Carrols was part of the weekly rhythm. Parents would pull into the lot after a ball game or church service, and kids would tug eagerly at the door, rushing inside to see Burger Boy smiling down at them from the wall. The sound of the grill sizzling, the smell of fries drifting through the air, and the sight of teenagers in paper hats working behind the counter. All of it felt like home. At its peak, Carrols operated more than 150 locations. It was big enough to be recognized, but still small enough to feel local. The chain became a gathering spot, a place where young couples shared milkshakes, where high schoolers lingered over fries, and where tired parents could treat their children to something special without spending too much. But as with so many of these stories, change was inevitable. In the late 1970s, Carrols struck a deal that would alter its course forever. The company agreed to become a franchisee of Burger King. Slowly, the cheerful burger boy began to disappear. His wide smile was replaced by the bold lettering of the Burger King logo, his paper hat by a crown. One by one, Carrols restaurants were converted until the chain itself ceased to exist under its own name. And yet, the story doesn't end in sadness. Carrols went on to become the largest Burger King franchisee in the United States, a quiet legacy that still shapes the fast food landscape today. But for those who remember the early days, the memory isn't of crowns or slogans. It is of that little burger boy smiling from roadside signs, welcoming families in for a meal that was simple, affordable, and filled with joy. Carrols may be gone, but its mascot lingers in the memory of those who once looked up at his round, burger-shaped face and felt, just for a moment, that fast food could be something personal, something playful, something all their own. In the sun-soaked streets of Miami during the 1950s, a small castle rose, not of stone and mortar, but of neon lights and the smell of grilled onions. This was Royal Castle, a chain that promised more than just a meal. It offered a taste of community, of warmth, of something distinctly Southern and yet universal in its charm. Royal Castle was built on simplicity. Its signature was the slider. Tiny hamburgers cooked with onions pressed into the grill, their savory aroma spilling out onto sidewalks and drawing customers inside. For just a few cents, you could order a handful, each one wrapped in thin paper, small enough to eat in 2 bites. Alongside those burgers came frosty mugs of Birch beer, a sweet, slightly spicy cousin of root beer. The combination, sliders and Birch beer, was as iconic to Miami as the ocean breeze drifting in from the Atlantic. The restaurants themselves were modest but inviting. Small white buildings with cheerful signs, counters lined with stools, and staff who seemed to know half their customers by name. Royal Castle was open late, often all night, making it a haven for night shift workers, teenagers lingering after a dance, and families grabbing a quick bite on their way home. At its peak, Royal Castle spread far beyond Miami, with more than 175 locations across the South. In cities like Atlanta and New Orleans, the glowing signs became landmarks, little castles that promised hot food, cold drinks, and a friendly welcome. People came not just for the food, but for the atmosphere. The chatter of neighbors, the clink of mugs against Formica counters, the simple pleasure of sliders steaming in a sack. For children, the magic was in the size. A paper sack filled with 6 or 12 sliders felt like treasure. They were small enough to share, perfect for little hands, and always warm to the touch. Families on a budget found them affordable, and teenagers loved the casual ritual of stopping by for a late-night snack. But time, as always, brought change. The 1970s and 80s saw competition from national giants with deeper pockets and faster systems. McDonald's and Burger King offered broader menus, glossy marketing, and the convenience of drive-through windows. Royal Castle, with its smaller scale and limited menu, struggled to keep pace. One by one, its locations closed, the neon signs flickering out, until only a handful remained. Today, there is just one Royal Castle left, standing quietly in Miami like a living relic. Step inside, and you'll find it much the same as it ever was. Sliders sizzling on the grill, onions filling the air, mugs of Birch beer frosted and waiting. For locals, it is more than a restaurant. It is a link to memory, a place where fathers once took their sons after ball games, where couples shared sliders at midnight, where a community found something familiar and comforting. Royal Castle may have shrunk from 175 castles to just one, but in that single surviving location, its spirit still burns. The taste of sliders, the fizz of Birch beer, the glow of a small white building on a Miami street, these are the details that linger, reminders of how even the simplest food can become part of a city's soul. There was a time in Southern California when a neon glow stretched across the evening sky, and a playful name lit up on roadside signs: Puppin' Taco. The chain carried a curious promise right in its title: two very different foods, hot dogs and tacos, side by side, offered beneath the same roof. It was an unusual pairing, and yet, for a brief, shining moment, it worked. Puppin' Taco first opened in the 1960s, when fast food was still an adventurous frontier. The architecture was bright and modern for its day, with slanted roofs and glowing signage that captured the eye of drivers cruising down sun-washed boulevards. Neon lights buzzed against the California dusk, reflecting off chrome trim and parking lot windows, to families piling out of station wagons or teenagers lingering in convertibles. Those signs felt like invitations, an escape into something fun, cheap, and satisfying. The menu was eclectic, even surprising. Hot dogs steamed and served in soft buns, tacos filled with seasoned beef, crisp lettuce and shredded cheese, pastrami sandwiches piled high, and milkshakes in tall, frosty cups. It was a strange mix, but it made Puppin' Taco memorable. Customers often joked that it was a place where everyone in the family could find something. Dad could have a hot dog, Mom a taco, the kids a milkshake, and no one had to compromise. The experience of dining there was pure mid-century California. The glow of neon, the hum of traffic, the clatter of trays against Formica counters. Commercial jingles played on the radio, short, catchy tunes that made children smile and linger in memory long after the meal was gone. Puppin' Taco captured the spirit of its time, when fast food was playful, experimental, and full of personality. At its peak, the chain grew to more than 100 locations across California, New Mexico, and Colorado. For many young people of the 60s and 70s, it became a hangout spot, an affordable meeting place after ball games, movie nights, or long days at the beach. The menu wasn't gourmet, but it was fun, quirky, and distinctly American. Yet like so many regional chains, Puppin' Taco's story faded as the giants of fast food tightened their grip. By the 1980s, Taco Bell was rising fast, dominating the market for Mexican-inspired fast food. In 1984, Taco Bell bought 99 Puppin' Taco locations, effectively erasing the brand almost overnight. The neon signs came down, the menus changed, and the playful combination of hot dogs and tacos slipped quietly into history. What remains today are mostly memories. Some people recall the taste of those tacos, simple, crunchy, inexpensive. Others remember the pastrami sandwiches or the sweet milkshakes served in waxy paper cups. And a few still picture the glowing signs, lighting up California freeways in the warm evening air. Pup and Taco was never a giant, but it didn't have to be. It was a reflection of its time, a bold, slightly odd idea that captured the imagination for just long enough to leave its mark. The chain is gone, but in memory, it still lives on. A place where tacos and hot dogs shared the same counter, where neon lights turned the night into possibility, and where the taste of California in the 60s came wrapped in paper and served with a smile. On the streets of San Francisco in the 1960s and 70s, there was a sign you could not miss. A giant Dachshund dog, dressed in a jaunty chef's hat and bow tie, perched proudly above the roadside. Its long, stretched body carried the words Doggie Diner, and beneath that glowing neon pup, families and travelers alike pulled into one of the city's most beloved fast food stops. Doggie Diner began in 1948, born out of post-war optimism and the growing appetite for quick, affordable meals. Unlike the sprawling national chains that would come later, Doggie Diner was intimate, more of a neighborhood institution than a corporate giant. Its architecture was simple, its counters lined with formica, stools polished by countless customers who slid into them after work, after school, or on Sunday afternoons with the family. The food was unpretentious, hearty, and satisfying. The menu centered on hot dogs, of course, but also included burgers, fries, and the kind of diner staples that made everyone feel at home. A tray might hold a steaming frank, split down the center, topped with onions and mustard, alongside a paper cup filled with soda and a side of salty fries. It wasn't gourmet, and it didn't have to be. For many, the joy came as much from the sign above the building as from the food on the plate. That cheerful Dachshund promised comfort, affordability, and a bit of fun. For San Franciscans, Doggie Diner became more than just a place to grab a quick meal. It became part of the city's cultural fabric. Families recall stopping there after Little League games, with kids still in dusty uniforms, grinning as they clutched their hot dogs. Teenagers met up at the counters, sliding coins across to pay for burgers before heading to the beach or into the city for the evening. Workers found a brief respite there, leaning against the counter during lunch breaks, a cup of coffee in hand beneath the watchful eyes of the Dachshund above. But like many small regional chains, the tides of fast food shifted. By the 1980s, the landscape was dominated by the expanding empires of McDonald's, Burger King, and others. National marketing budgets and standardized menus made it hard for a local chain to compete. In 1986, the last Doggie Diner location closed its doors, and the little hot dog restaurant with the big Dachshund disappeared from everyday life. Yet the story did not end there. The Dachshund signs themselves, once whimsical advertisements for a local eatery, took on a life of their own. Rather than being discarded, they were preserved, adopted by the community, and celebrated as landmarks. Today, a few of those iconic Dachshunds remain standing in San Francisco, not as restaurant signs, but as pieces of public art, reminders of a different time. For those who lived in the city during its heyday, Doggie Diner carries a special kind of nostalgia. It was quirky, unmistakable, and charming in its simplicity. It spoke to an era when fast food didn't just mean speed, but also personality, when even a humble hot dog stand could carve out its place in memory with a smiling mascot and a welcoming counter. Though the diners are gone, the Dachshund endures, long-bodied, bow-tied, and still standing guard over the streets of San Francisco. And for anyone who remembers stopping there, that little dog isn't just a sign. It's a companion to memory, wagging its tail in neon light, inviting them back to a time that will never return, but will never be forgotten. In the late 1970s and early 80s, there was a restaurant chain that promised something different, something festive, colorful, and full of flavor. It was called Chi-Chi's, and for many Americans, it was their very first taste of Mexican-inspired food. Step inside a Chi-Chi's, and the mood was unlike the typical fast food stop. The walls were decorated with sombreros and bright murals, the lights were warm, and the sound of laughter seemed to drift across every booth. For families in the Midwest or the Northeast, places far from the border, it felt exotic, even adventurous. Here, taco salads came in crisp tortilla bowls. Sizzling platters of fajitas arrived with a flourish, and baskets of warm chips were served alongside tangy salsa that left just a hint of spice on the tongue. For many children, Chi-Chi's was where they learned what a burrito was, or where they first tried fried ice cream, a novelty dessert that combined warmth, crunch, and sweetness in one unforgettable bite. Birthdays were celebrated there, with staff gathering to sing around the table while parents raised margarita glasses rimmed in salt. In its prime, Chi-Chi's was a lively mix of food and festivity, a place where even a Tuesday night could feel like a holiday south of the border. By the mid-1980s, there were more than 200 Chi-Chi's locations across America. It seemed as if the chain would only continue to grow, riding the wave of America's growing curiosity for international flavors. Yet, as the 1990s approached, trouble began to surface. Competitors like Taco Bell and Chili's adapted faster, offering menus that were quicker, cheaper, or more in tune with changing tastes. Management struggled to steer Chi-Chi's through the storm. Locations began closing, but the chain might have survived if not for the tragedy that came next. In 2003, a hepatitis A outbreak linked to green onions served at several Chi-Chi's restaurants struck the brand a fatal blow. Hundreds of people were sickened, and tragically, some even lost their lives. The news spread quickly, and what had once been a name associated with family celebrations became forever tied to sorrow. Lawsuits mounted, trust evaporated, and within a year, the last Chi-Chi's in the United States closed its doors. It was a painful ending for a chain that had once promised joy and festivity. The neon signs came down, the sombreros disappeared, and the laughter that had filled those dining rooms went silent. Yet the memory of Chi-Chi's lingers. In small ways, its spirit has lived on, through a jar of Chi-Chi's branded salsa on a grocery store shelf, or in restaurants overseas, where the name still means something festive. For Americans, though, the chain remains a bittersweet memory, forever shadowed by the tragedy that ended it. Still, for those who dined there in the 1980s, Chi-Chi's recalls a different image. Families gathered around big platters of nachos, children marveling at fried ice cream, parents enjoying margaritas beneath colorful lamps. It was a place of laughter, warmth, and discovery. One that showed Americans a new kind of flavor. And though its story ended in sadness, The memories of those Mexican nights, full of cheer and light, still shine quietly in the hearts of those who were there. In the world of fast food, timing is everything. For most of America in the 1960s and 70s, burgers were supposed to be indulgent, juicy, greasy, and piled high with cheese. It was comfort food, not something people wanted to feel guilty about. And yet, there was once a chain that looked into the future and imagined something different. That chain was called Delights. From the outside, Delights didn't look too different from the burger joints of its day. A glowing sign, booths lined in vinyl, and the steady hum of families shuffling in for a quick meal. But the menu told another story. Instead of boasting about the biggest burger or the fattiest fries, Delights leaned into a new message: food that was better for you. Their burgers were made with leaner beef, their buns promised more whole grains and fiber, and even their desserts carried a reputation of being lighter than the competition. For some, it was a refreshing change. Parents felt good about bringing their children there, knowing the meal came with a little less guilt. Health-conscious diners, long before such a phrase was common, found comfort in the idea that fast food didn't have to mean heavy food. The commercials spoke about lighter eating, with the same pride that other chains boasted about more beef or extra cheese. And yet, as forward-thinking as it was, Delights may have been too far ahead of its time. Most Americans weren't ready for health food at the drive-thru. The culture of the day celebrated abundance: supersized sodas, double burgers, fries spilling out of their cartons. In that landscape, a leaner burger felt less like a treat and more like a compromise. Children begged their parents for the bright, playful mascots at McDonald's. Teenagers wanted to order the Big Mac or the Whopper, names that carried weight and status. Delights, with its quiet promise of being better for you, struggled to compete. Locations began closing one by one. Without the scale or the marketing muscle of its bigger rivals, Delights faded into obscurity. Its message, that fast food could be mindful, balanced, and even a little nourishing, was drowned out in the clamor of louder, flashier competitors. By the time America began to truly embrace health-conscious eating in the 1990s and beyond, Delights was long gone. But if you ask those who remember it, the chain still brings a smile. There are faint memories of a burger that tasted just a bit different, lighter somehow, but still satisfying. There are recollections of sitting in booths with parents who felt reassured that their family was making a better choice. And there's a quiet admiration, looking back, for a company that dared to believe that fast food could be both quick and kind to the body. In a way, Delights lives on, not in its restaurants, which have all disappeared, but in the healthier menus that chains eventually adopted decades later. The grilled chicken sandwiches, the salads, the wraps, all of them carry an echo of what Delights tried to offer before anyone else thought to try. It was a chain ahead of its time, and perhaps that was its undoing. But for those who remember, Delights represents a small but meaningful attempt to change the way America thought about food, long before the culture was ready to listen. If ever there was a place where dessert became a spectacle, it was Farrell's Ice Cream Parlour. Founded in Portland, Oregon in 1963, Farrell's wasn't just about ice cream. It was about celebration. Walking through the door felt less like stepping into a restaurant and more like entering a carnival. The air was filled with laughter, the clinking of spoons against glass dishes, and somewhere in the background, the distant sound of a bass drum, waiting to announce another oversized Sundae. The decor was pure nostalgia even then. Striped awnings, brass rails, wooden booths, and old-fashioned candy jars lined along the counter. The waitstaff wore striped vests, straw hats, and wide smiles, as though each shift were a performance. And in many ways, it was. Farrell's built its reputation not just on what you ordered, but how it was delivered. Nothing captured that better than their most famous creation, the zoo. Imagine a mountain of ice cream, dozens of scoops piled high, drenched in syrups, crowned with whipped cream and cherries. But ordering it wasn't a quiet affair. The moment a table called for the zoo, a procession began. Drums pounded, sirens blared, employees marched through the parlor with the sundae lifted high, shouting, "Make way for the zoo!" Children clapped, parents laughed, and strangers leaned in to watch the spectacle unfold. It was impossible not to smile. For families, Farrell's became a birthday tradition. A child turning 10 could count on hearing their name announced to the entire room, followed by a parade of ice cream and music. Teenagers on dates lingered over banana splits served in long glass boats, while grandparents reminisced about old soda fountains as they sipped root beer floats. Farrell's was more than a restaurant. It was a stage where ordinary evenings turned into cherished memories. But as the decades passed, America's tastes began to change. The over-the-top celebrations that once felt magical started to feel excessive to a new generation. Health-conscious dining, rising costs, and the arrival of newer, sleeker dessert spots made Farrell's feel like a relic. Locations closed one by one, their joyful parades silenced by the quiet hum of modern life. There were attempts to revive the chain. A few stores reopened in the 2000s, and for a brief moment the drums beat again, and children once more shouted with delight at the zoo's arrival. But it wasn't enough to sustain the business. In 2019, the last Farrell's closed its doors, marking the end of an era. Still, for those who remember, Farrell's lives on vividly. The sound of the drum roll, the gleam of polished brass, the towering sundaes that seemed larger than life. They all remain tucked away in the memory of countless birthdays, first dates, and family outings. It is easy, in retrospect, to see Farrell's as a place that was never meant to last forever. It belonged to a time when excess was joyful, when a restaurant could feel like a circus, and a scoop of ice cream could become an event. And though its doors are shut, the echoes of laughter, the flash of striped vests, and the spectacle of the zoo will always hold a place in the sweet tooth of America's nostalgia. In the late 1960s, a new fried chicken chain seemed poised to conquer America. Its name carried with it the laughter of the Grand Ole Opry, the warmth of Southern charm, and the sparkle of a beloved entertainer, Minnie Pearl's Chicken. Minnie Pearl herself was not a chef, but a country comedian, famous for her wide-brimmed hat with the dangling price tag, her playful howdy greeting, and her unmistakable voice that felt like home to millions. It seemed like a winning combination. The friendliness of Minnie Pearl's name, paired with the booming popularity of fried chicken after Colonel Sanders had proven the market. Investors rushed in, eager to capture a piece of what they believed was the next great fast food empire. Within months, hundreds of locations appeared almost overnight, their signs featuring Minnie's smiling face and bright southern lettering. The restaurants promised crispy fried chicken served with a touch of country hospitality. Families pulled into parking lots expecting to find something warm and welcoming, a place where laughter and fried chicken went hand in hand. For a brief moment, it seemed like Minnie Pearl's chicken might truly rival Kentucky Fried Chicken itself, but the dream unraveled as quickly as it began. Behind the charm of the brand lay deep problems. Quality was inconsistent. Some restaurants served juicy, flavorful chicken, while others turned out dry, greasy meals that left customers disappointed. Management, spread too thin and chasing rapid expansion, failed to maintain standards. And worse still, financial scandals began to emerge. Mismanagement and shady dealings plagued the parent company, shaking investor confidence and leaving franchise owners stranded. By the early 1970s, what had looked like a rocket to the top had collapsed in spectacular fashion. Locations closed as quickly as they had opened, leaving empty buildings and confused customers in their wake. In business schools, the story of Minnie Pearl's chicken became a case study, not of success, but of how unchecked ambition and poor oversight can ruin even the most promising idea. For Minnie Pearl herself, the collapse was bittersweet. She had lent her name and image to the chain, but she had little involvement in its day-to-day operations. While her career in comedy and television continued, her name, so long associated with joy and laughter, was now also tied to one of the fastest restaurant failures in American history. Yet audiences forgave her. To most, Minnie remained the same kind, funny soul they had always known. Today, nothing tangible remains of the chain. No lingering restaurants, no famous recipes tucked away in small towns. What survives is mostly memory, of garish signs with Minnie's smiling face, of fried chicken served in a rush of optimism, and of a dream that rose too high and fell too fast. And yet, for those who were there, Minnie Pearl's chicken holds a strange kind of nostalgia. It reminds us of an era when fast food was the Wild West, when new names appeared overnight, chasing fame and fortune, some rising into icons, while others vanished into history. Minnie Pearl's chicken may have collapsed in 1971, but in the soft glow of memory, it lingers, a reminder that not all stories of food are about success. Some are about the risks we take, the dreams we chase, and the lessons left behind when the neon signs go dark. There was a time when the name Walgreens meant more than a corner drugstore. In the 1970s, the company decided to take its brand beyond prescriptions and cosmetics and into something unexpected, a chain of diners called Wags. The name itself was short, snappy, and easy to remember, meant to suggest friendliness and comfort. For a while, it seemed like the idea might just work. Wags restaurants often sat beside or near Walgreens stores, their architecture simple and functional, with large windows and bright signage that promised a hot meal at any hour of the day or night. Inside, the atmosphere was familiar to anyone who loved diners. Booths of vinyl seating, long counters with swivel stools, and the gentle clink of coffee cups and silverware. The smell of bacon, pancakes, and fresh coffee lingered in the air, reminding customers that here was a place where breakfast was always on the menu. The menu at Wag's was extensive. You could find the classics: burgers stacked with lettuce and tomato, golden French fries served in wire baskets, and pancakes dripping with syrup. There were milkshakes and sundaes for children, hearty steak and egg platters for late-night diners, and bowls of chili for those in between. Families would come in on Saturday mornings for breakfast, while night owls and college students might wander in at 2 a.m. to share a booth after a night out. For many, Wag's was reliable, a place where the lights were always on and the coffee never ran dry. And yet, there was always something just a little off about the concept. Customers enjoyed the food, but they often asked themselves a simple question: why eat in a drugstore's diner? The connection between Walgreens and a full-service restaurant never quite clicked in the minds of the public. While Walgreens had hoped the brand recognition would bring trust and loyalty, it sometimes brought confusion instead. Competition also began to weigh heavily. By the 1980s, the diner and casual restaurant space was crowded. Denny's, IHOP, and other chains already had strong footholds in the 24-hour dining market. Wag's, though well-liked by some, struggled to stand out. Rising costs, coupled with a lack of clear identity, slowly drained the company's enthusiasm for the venture. By the early 1990s, Walgreens decided to retreat back to what it did best: pharmacies and retail. The last Wag's locations closed in 1991, ending a 2-decade experiment in bringing diner culture under the Walgreens umbrella. For many customers, the end was quiet. Signs came down, buildings were converted, and Wag's slipped out of memory almost as quickly as it had arrived. Still, in the minds of those who once stopped for a late-night burger or shared pancakes after a long drive, Wag's holds a certain place. It was never as iconic as other diners, but its lights once glowed against the darkness of the American night. For a brief time, Wag's captured the essence of what diners have always meant: welcoming, unpretentious, and open to all. Today, Wag's is remembered as a curiosity in the world of fast food and diners, a reminder that even familiar names can stumble when they step too far from home. Yet, for those who sat in its booths, sipping coffee under fluorescent lights, it is remembered as one more piece of Americana, warm, fleeting, and gone too soon. In the mid-1960s, a new kind of restaurant quietly appeared in Dallas, Texas. Its name was Steak and Ale, and while the title sounded simple, what it offered was something fresh, even daring for its time. Founded in 1966, the chain invited Americans to step into a space styled after an old English pub: dark wood beams, brass fixtures, and the warm glow of lantern-like lights. It felt both rustic and elegant, as if a slice of Europe had found its way into the suburbs of America. For many families, Steak and Ale quickly became a special night out. The prices were reasonable, but the experience felt elevated compared to the burger joints and coffee shops nearby. Guests settled into booths surrounded by the quiet hum of conversation, the smell of sizzling meat drifting from the kitchen, and the promise of something novel waiting just around the corner. That novelty was the salad bar, a concept that would ripple through the dining industry for decades. Instead of simply being handed a plate of greens, customers were invited to walk up and build their own creations: crisp lettuce, chilled cherry tomatoes, shredded carrots, bacon bits, cheese, and creamy dressings all waited under glass. For children, the salad bar felt like a small adventure, a moment of independence to choose what they wanted. For adults, it was a sign that dining out could be both affordable and a little indulgent. Of course, the steaks were the centerpiece. One of the most famous was the Kensington Club, marinated to tenderness and served on hot platters with sides that comforted as much as they filled. Diners remember baked potatoes split open with pats of butter melting inside, bread warm from the oven, and pitchers of ale or iced tea poured with a smile. Steak and ale struck a balance. It wasn't fast food, but it wasn't fine dining either. It was somewhere in the middle, and in that middle, it found its magic. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, steak and ale grew steadily, with hundreds of locations across the country. Ads promised a hearty meal in a setting that felt timeless. Families came after church on Sundays. Co-workers gathered on Fridays to celebrate the end of the week. And couples lingered over quiet dinners in dimly lit corners. For many, it became part of the rhythm of American life. But by the late 1980s, cracks began to show. Competition from newer casual dining chains like Chili's, TGI Fridays, and Applebee's drew away younger diners looking for a livelier atmosphere. Rising costs, changing tastes, and a lack of reinvention made it difficult for steak and ale to keep pace. Slowly, locations began to close. By 2008, the last remaining restaurants shuttered their doors, leaving behind only memories and recipes. Yet the story didn't quite end there. The salad bar concept that steak and ale helped popularize lived on, echoed in countless other restaurants across the nation. And in 2024, in Dallas, where it all began, Steak and Ale quietly reopened, a nostalgic rebirth meant to honor its past and introduce it to a new generation. For those who remember, though, Steak and Ale will always be more than a chain. It was the soft clink of glass against wood, the dim lighting that made every meal feel like a celebration, and the first time a child piled bacon bits too high on a plate of lettuce. It was a place where the ordinary act of eating out became just a little extraordinary. As we bring this journey to a close, let us linger for just a moment in the glow of neon signs that no longer shine. Imagine the highways of America in decades past. Long stretches of blacktop broken by the promise of food, laughter, and comfort. Those bright, inviting signs stood like beacons against the night sky, calling weary travelers and hungry families inside. Now, so many of them have gone dark. The orange roofs, the barn-shaped diners, the castles and towers, the playful mascots, they've all slipped into memory. And yet, in their absence, they remain strangely alive. They live in the taste of a burger that reminds you of childhood, in the sound of ice clinking in a frosty mug of root beer, in the scent of fried chicken drifting through a summer evening. They live in the recollections of family road trips, when a stop at a familiar chain was more than a meal. It was part of the adventure itself. These forgotten fast food chains were never just about food. They were about identity, about belonging to a moment in time. They gave children a place to unwrap toys from a paper meal box, to spin on orange vinyl stools, or to race to the salad bar with eyes wide at the endless choices. They gave parents a chance to sit back, sip coffee, and feel the comfort of sharing something simple with the people they loved. Of course, times changed. Businesses closed, markets shifted, and tastes evolved. What seemed eternal proved fragile, and one by one, those brands faded away. But as we've seen tonight, the memories have not vanished. They are carried gently within those who lived them. Even now, someone out there still remembers their first bite of a Big Barney, or the way a Pup and Taco neon sign flickered on at dusk, or the laughter of friends gathered around a Farrell's ice cream sundae so large it required a parade of servers. And so, the question lingers softly in the air. If you could bring one of them back, just one, which would it be? Would you choose the playful glow of Burger Chef, the root beer nights at Doggie and Suds, the hearty comfort of steak and ale, or perhaps a smaller, more personal place, tied to your own childhood town, that others might never know but you remember still? These memories are fragile, but they endure because we share them. That is the gift of nostalgia. It is both deeply personal and yet strangely universal. What was once yours alone can spark recognition in someone else. A smile, a nod, a yes, I remember that too. In that way, these places live on, not through buildings or business plans, but through stories told in quiet moments. And here, at Sleepytown Radio, it is our privilege to hold those stories with you, to speak them aloud slowly, gently, so they can drift with you into rest. Because sometimes the sweetest way to fall asleep is to remember, not the noise of headlines, but the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. So, as we close, I invite you to share your own memories. Did you ever eat at one of these places? Do you remember the taste, the colors, the sound of the jukebox, or the clatter of trays? Leave your story in the comments, and let others find a spark of their own past within yours. And if these quiet stories bring you comfort, we'd be grateful if you subscribed, liked, or shared them, so that more people, searching for rest, can find a gentle home here with us. For now, it is time to let go of the road, to turn off the neon, and to rest. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your heart warmed by the echoes of simpler times. Good night, dear listener. Until next time, this has been Sleepytown Radio.